Welcome everybody to another panel of the Conferência Brasileira de Mudança do Clima. I'm Daniela Chiaretti, a journalist, the environmental correspondent from Valor Econômico, which is the leading business newspaper in Brazil. And I'm really happy and honored to mediate this panel today with three great colleagues and we are going to talk about, our panel is from outside to inside and the global climate context of nowadays and what may be inspirational for Brazil. And I'm a journalist and I'm writing about climate issues from almost 25 years, and on a daily regular basis I'm writing about climate and climate negotiations in Valor Econômico. And we are in very challenging times and in a very special day and in a very decisive decade, because from 2020 to 2030, the global emissions must be cut by half if we want to meet the compromises of the Paris Agreement, and if we want to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees. And well, without getting longer on this panel, I want to call Ana Toni, which is the executive director of Instituto Clima e Sociedade. And Ana is also, which co-hosts the Brazilian Conference of Climate Change. And so, hi Ana.
Hey, Dani, really strange for us to be speaking English among ourselves, but we have two great colleagues, so in terms of socializing, we decided to do all the panel in English. So I just wanted to also welcome everybody, as X is one of the co-hosts together with a bunch of great organizations, ICLEI, WWF, ETHOS, obviously, CBC, IPAN, so many of them, Saúde e Alegria. So I just wanted to say it's really nice that we are all here in the Brazil Conference on Climate Change, discussing key issues for our future. This meeting happens every year, which is great. We have, despite of COVID, we had to make it again. And bringing the international perspective is really important. So Daniela, it's an honor to be moderated by you. Thank you very much for accepting this function. And now we will have our panelists, and I come back at the end for the Brazilian perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Ana. Thank you. Let me introduce our other colleagues. So we have Yamit Dainet, which is the engineer by training. She just told me this today. And Yamit is the director of the climate negotiations to the WRI, which is the World Resources Institute, a very famous think tank based in the US and working with climate. So Yamit is going to tell us a little bit about the negotiations and everything. And let me introduce also Isabel Cavalier Adave. I hope I pronounced it correctly. She's the co-founder of Transforma and the senior consultant of Mission 2020. And then I will ask you if you can talk a little bit about your institution, just for the audience to understand. But let maybe talk to Yamit and then pass the floor to Isabel. So Yamit, very nice to meet you in this. Yamit is based in Washington, D.C. And so let me ask you something about this great, everybody's willing to know what is going on in the States. And I would So yesterday we just saw that President Trump has, so the US is not longer part of the Paris Agreement. And I would like to ask you what happens if Mr. Joe Biden wins the election? What will be the outcome, Yamit?
Well, thank you very much, Daniela, for this question. As you know, my organization is a think tank and a bipartisan think tank. So because the election is still up running, there's votes being counting, I cannot, comment very much on what would happen and prejudge. So I need to be really careful about this. What I can tell you, however, is no matter the results, so of course, pending the result, we will know whether or not the US is going to stay out of the Paris Agreement for just a couple of months or a few years to come. But no matter what happens, I think that the role of non-state actors is going to continue to be more important than ever. And I think that one of the lessons that we learned from this election, in any case, is that the narrative will matter. I think it's going to be very important to make sure that people understand, not just the elites, but everyone understand that they do not have to choose between economy and climate, between job and climate, between economy and health. They can have it all. And we will be working with many other organizations, including our colleagues, with Anatoni, Isabel, to really make the case, continue to make the case for that. And of course, the diplomacy, is going to play a key role, no matter again the outcome. And we've seen some positive signals from other countries, who said for their statements that no matter what happened, the race is on. We have the EU and China who have indicated that they will increase their ambitions moving forward. This was followed by signals from Japan, from South Korea, continued leadership from vulnerable countries. So the race is on. The question is really how fast we're going to move forward. So that's what I can say at the moment.
So yeah, oh yes, Yamit. So maybe we can go to Isabel a little bit, and Isabel is talking to us from Bogota, isn't it? And so she can give us another perspective, which is the perspective of the continent of Latin America, where we are. And then we can go back to Yamit, maybe, because Yamit is a specialist in climate negotiations, and you can tell us a little bit where we are now and what we need to go to Glasgow next year to the next COP. But let's listen to Isabel a little bit.
Muito obrigada, Ana e Dani, for this very kind invitation to this conference. Yes, so Latin America is currently a continent that is at a crossroads. We are, I would say, stuck in the middle in a way. We are a continent that is not producing the highest level of emissions, nor are we the poorest country. But at the same time, we are at a moment of our development where we could either become a continent that goes in the very wrong way, locking in huge emissions, or really we are still in time to starting an organized transition to decarbonization. And in the world, what we are seeing really is that most countries that have been advancing on this agenda, including many developing countries, many big emerging countries that are directly interacting with our region, like China, but also others in Asia, Europe, and so on, have decided they will take on this decarbonization path. And they are our main trading partners. And let's remember, we are a region that is highly dependent on commodity exports. Most of them, or for many countries in our region, it is commodities that are fossil fuel commodities. We are big exporters of oil, coal, gas, including Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, Venezuela, Argentina, Ecuador. Many of our countries really depend on this. And we are already seeing the effects of decarbonization policies hit our continent. You can look at the example of my country, is a perfect example. Colombia is the 6th major exporter of coal in the world, and the market is closing up. And the big challenge we are now facing is we will become a region that has a huge pressure to absorb all of those fossils that we are probably not going to be able to export, and probably locking in a really wrong trajectory. And the current crisis is the perfect example of what we should be avoiding. We've been severely hit by COVID, severely hit by an economic downturn related to both COVID and the oil crisis. Our region is expected to decrease its GDP between 9 and 10% this year. All of our countries are only going to see very sluggish recovery in 2021. And it's clear that this happens because we depend too much on commodities like oil, like gas, like coal. Of course, there are other important issues on climate for the region, such as deforestation, and this is at the heart of the Brazilian debate, just as it is for other countries in the region, like Colombia, or less known countries like Argentina or Mexico that are also seeing high deforestation rates. So both of those big agendas, the energy agenda and the deforestation agenda, I think are going to be quite core to how our region moves forward or lags behind on climate, which is unfortunately what we are seeing now. And I guess as part of a little bit of an extra part of the comments to Yamid's answer on the US election outcomes, I can freely say, fortunately, that it will be a big difference for our region if Joe Biden wins or if Trump wins. If Joe Biden wins, we will see a federal government that is pressing our region for moving ahead on climate, for decarbonizing, favoring sectors that will help in the transition, while it is not going to be the case the other way around. Of course, the United States is not the only important partner. China is nowadays the biggest trade partner with the entire Latin America. China, as many of you will probably know, has already committed to decarbonizing their economy before 2060 and starting peaking before 2030. So we have been seeing movement from China that will also impact our region in quite a significant way. So, as I said, a continent a little bit stuck in the middle, in a moment where we could go right, we could go wrong. Unfortunately, politics now are showing we are probably going in the wrong direction. So hopefully we will all together be able to shift that and go into the right transition pathway in the short term.
Well, thank you, Isabel. Thank you very much for your, wow, very tough and original way of seeing our Latin America continent. Very good analysis and challenging. It's difficult to be not the biggest emission and also not the poorest and the most vulnerable. We are in the middle of somewhere. Okay, thank you. Yamid, before I go back to Anna, I will ask Yamid if you can tell us a little bit where we are in the negotiations and what are the challenges and the opportunities from here to COP26.
Thank you very much, Daniela, and it was really good to have the context, from Isabel on what this means, for Latin American countries, really, and for Brazil, as well. What I can tell you, even before, telling you where we are, let's figure out where we need to be. So, Daniela and Isabel mentioned the 1.5 degree, trying to get a place, a world that is safe. And let's actually step back and look at where we need to be next year during COP26, that COP that was actually postponed, that should have happened, this year, but was postponed because of COVID. We are supposed to deliver a package that will need to feature a signal of ambition. You remember that 5 years ago, in Paris, countries actually came up with their national plans, but realized that those national plans were not enough to keep us safe, because they were trending towards a global temperature increase of near to 3 degrees, and they agreed to come back on the table every 5 years, with more ambition to really close that gap and to sustain a chance, to meet, the promise of the Paris Agreement. So this is why at COP26, we will need to make sure that ambition will be at the agenda. We will look at how all NDCs, and we have seen already a few being submitted, but there will be more this year and next year, where we are on the temperature gap, where we are on the long-term strategies, where we are on the national adaptation plans in the context of COVID recovery, but also what have we done to scale up and to shift the support that is supposed to drive this ambition. So this is going to be really, that context is going to be important. In addition to that, during the negotiations, we're going to have, we have not yet finalized the rules of the game. Paris tells us what we need to do, but and we agreed in Katowice broadly, how we do this, but we haven't decided yet how we're going to cooperate voluntarily by using market mechanisms or not. And we also need to have more detailed rules on how we're going to be transparent, among another. There's going to be still decisions on how we advance, the scaling up of support, look at, what is still needed. And we need to also figure out how we're going to assess, adaptation and deal with loss and damage. Those issues are still going to be in the mix. And on those issues, especially the use of market mechanisms, transparency, and also the what we call common time frame, which means the time span by when we're going to set the pace of our national plans. Are we going to set targets for 5 years or for 10 years? How long, what is going to mean for implementation? Those guidelines need still to be, and signals needs to be put forward. And in addition, that the COP26 bring a lot of non-state actors together, and we will need to look at what type of initiatives, both by countries, non-state actors, are moving the agenda, linking the real economy with the negotiations to really get us there where we need to be. Where we are, therefore, bearing in mind that we have those 3 buckets, for the package, where we are. We have heard of China, Japan, South Korea, setting up carbon and climate neutrality goals. For China, a carbon neutrality goal by 2060, Japan and South Korea by 2050. The EU had already set up a neutrality goal by 2050, but they also indicated that they are going to agree by the 12th of December, hopefully at least a 55 target, by 2030, a shorter term goal to meet that long-term goal of the Paris Agreement. And we have a number of renewable countries that have and will continue to come up, probably 50, altogether by the end of the year, to really demonstrate that even if they did not contribute it the most, they are still playing their game as a matter of survival too. And we do hope that other major advanced countries are, following that signals. The race is on, but too many other countries are still dragging their feet, many advanced countries. And of course, this is on the backdrop of the US election. Everybody wait, for what is going to happen. There's still uncertainties on the issue of finance, and we are still trying, despite COVID, despite the logistical challenges, try to keep the multilateral space alive. There's going to be a dialogue at the end of the month, beginning of December, to try to have countries to come again together virtually to think about, how to advance some options, on outstanding issues. And finally, this year we're going to have the anniversary of the Paris Agreement, and the theme is going to be ambition again. But whether there's going to be some solidarity signals remains to be seen. My final word is, we mentioned COVID. The COVID recovery efforts by country needs to be aligned. Countries need to seize this opportunity to build back better. At the moment, we're not necessarily where we need to be. There are some countries that are doing very well, that are, taking this opportunity to really green and make their transition as just as possible. But some countries, as alluded even by Isabel, are missing the boat, and may take the risk for their economy to lock them into a dirty future in stranded assets that may actually undermine their ability to even meet their sustainable development, goals. In addition, we're still far from, the 1.5 degree. We make progress just with China. It seems that, if China is serious about implementing its goal, we could have, it means that we would reduce the emission, the temperature increase by 0.2 to 0.3 degrees Celsius. Let's see, how we're going to navigate, through the year. Certainly the race is on. The question is, again, how fast it's going to be.
Thank you, Yamid. Thank you very much for this updating us where we are and what is ahead of us. And so maybe now we can listen a little bit to Anna Toni and to understand where we are, your vision, Anna, from this global context, and also Brazil, where we are at, in this picture. And so, and then maybe we can just one thing, Anna, before you talk. Let me tell you, the audience, that if somebody wants to put questions for us, put it on the chat. You can put it in Portuguese, and we are going to answer. Yeah. So please.
Thank you, Daniela. Thank you so much. And I do need to acknowledge that's really nice to have a 4 women panel. I feel really, really pleased sharing the panel with the 3 of you. It's a pleasure. I think, Yamid gave us the very legal on where we need to be. It was, I think, is a great question, and we are far from that. And I really like to go back to what Isabel was also talking, where is the region? And why she was talking, I remember a saying from Mahatma Gandhi, when Gandhi used to say that first, they ignore us. Second, they laugh at us. Then third, they fight against us. And then finally, we win. And my feeling in the Latin American country, and especially in Brazil, is that we are in the phase of fighting. Now, they have ignored us for many years on the climate issue. They have laughed at us on the climate issue for many years. Now they're fighting back because they know there is no way back. So I think what Isabel mentioned about the fossil fuel, deforestation, some of unsustainable agricultural practice, those old ways of doing things, they are now really fighting to stay there. But we all know there is no way back. We all know that we have to have economies that's low carbon. And I have no doubt as a humanity that we will need to win because we want to be in this planet. It's not the planet that is not going to survive, it's humanity, and therefore we will do something. But I wanted also to go back to both the US and Brazil and linking those two things. We are today, everybody trying to see who is going to be the next president in the US. And I think, like Isabel, that will make a huge difference, very much so. Not only on the multilateral issues, we heard already from John Biden that if he is elected in 77 days, the US will be back to the Paris Agreement. That's a very important sign. We see movement in Europe, in South Korea, in China, all the other countries. US is a great emitter and we need them on board. And Brazil needs to be fully on board. Obviously, we never left the Paris Agreement, but one thing, you don't need to leave the Paris Agreement. You have also to implement the Paris Agreement. And the question I have is, how is Brazil doing on its implementation? And many of us that have been following, it's hard to say. We will soon get some tips on how we're doing. We know that the Observatório do Clima will tomorrow release a very important report that they are doing about has Brazil been able to fulfill its 2020 targets from Kyoto. Have we managed that? Yes or no? Because that will give us some tips, and we are already seeing how we're doing on deforestation. If staying in the Paris Agreement means fulfilling our obligations, and for what I can see in terms of the deforestation rate is our biggest emission, we probably far away from from our own targets, from what we have decided, the contributions that we as Brazil put forward, and obviously much further from where we should be. So we always have the glass half full or half empty. So I talked about the half empty, but let me also talk about the half full. As we have seen in the US, again, in all over the world, and in Brazil is no difference. We have seen that the climate issue is no longer an issue for environmentalists. The climate issue is an issue for the economic sector, for the private sector, for financial investors. This has been debated tremendously here in Brazil at the moment. Subnational governments, governors, mayors, we're going to have an election for mayorhood at the moment. You can see many new politicians coming up, thinking about actions. We cannot just rely on the federal government. We have to do our part. And I have seen in Brazil that both the private sectors, the financial sector, as well as subnationals, they're really stepping up the actions that we need to do. So that's the half full idea. But we need both. We need the federal government and all those other sectors. So hopefully we'll see some changes on the US election tonight, and that will be a tremendous positive signal for us in Brazil, and I think for the whole world. Stop here and we can come back later.
Okay, thanks, Anna, for this wrap up. And I don't know, we have some questions here. Maybe I can put it. The first one, maybe Isabel can answer, is something, how do you see with what Anna just said, how do you see the Paris Agreement dialoguing, connecting with the other agreements, including the trade agreements, including the European Union and Mercosur agreement?
Thank you for the question. The Paris Agreement is without doubt a big framing agreement that has started to populate policy and politics throughout different sectors, including trade. If you see the big tendency now in the European Union with respect to its own trade agreements is to want to make all trade agreements compatible with the Paris Agreement, and even more so, the most progressive countries are wanting to use trade agreements in order to help fulfill the Paris Agreement objectives. And this is obvious for the EU-Mercosur, which is, of course, one of the biggest interesting spaces on trade at the moment, and on how trade and climate are going to be interacting through diverse international treaties. But there are also several other bilateral treaty agreements that are probably going to be seeing the same kind of move. There are other treaties that are also Paris Agreement. You can think about other international environmental treaties like the Biodiversity Convention and so on, which all, again, I think see and work with the Paris Agreement as parts of a single system where all of them should jointly address the same objectives. So Paris becomes the benchmark. The Paris objectives are clearly for everyone, even with the US having seen them, well, us having seen the US leaving, or today the US's, actually yesterday, the US's withdrawal came into force from the Paris Agreement. The rest of the world remains committed to this benchmark, and it will be, I think, the benchmark used throughout all other international agreements, including those on trade. I'll leave it there for now.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I don't know if Anna would like to comment on that, or I can ask another. I don't know, Anna.
No, yes, I would love to. I think, no, totally in agreement. The Mercosur and EU agreement, which the one that I think that's very hot at the moment, especially for us, that's in Mercosur. And this morning we did have a very good discussion with the European Union that they promoted as well. I think that's a very interesting agreement that have the issue of climate, and I think that you have decided for them how important the climate issue is. We have seen how the reaction of Europeans, both consumers, investors, but also governments and parliaments, even saying if a country like Brazil would not deal with our deforestation and what's happening in the Amazon with the fires, there will be very, very difficult for them to approve and ratify the agreement. So we can see concretely that the issue of environment and climate can stop perhaps a big trade agreement that probably will be very good for both sides. But if we don't do our homework in all the countries, and in Brazil in particular, those opportunities start being put in danger. So I think the world is saying with all the trade agreements, and the EU Mercosur is an example, is that no longer people will be able just to have deal badly on environmental human rights issues and well on trade. Those things are coming together. They will be coming together closer and closer. We heard all the agreements are now in the same vein. As I said, there's no way back, and we need to show impact, and we need to show results on our own environmental goals and laws. That's nothing else that people are asking. Just show the impact we have on your own laws. And I think that's a fair demand from the other side, that we show that we are having an impact and are implementing our own laws before they ratify the agreement.
Yeah. Thanks, Anna. And Yamit, Anna has mentioned the subnational effort in Brazil. In a week, actually, we're going to have elections for majors and subnational elections. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about the We Are Still In movement, how it was this movement in the US during the last 4 years.
Yes, thank you very much, Daniela. Actually, the Still In movement, came to birth, when, by a few non-state actors that were attending the Marrakesh COP, the COP22 in Marrakesh, when, after the result of the election, 4 years ago. So, and it's still, it's not just continuing, it's actually taking place. At the moment, and it's not just the subnational movement. I think the cities need to take into account that the private sectors that is also playing such an important role for them is also embracing this, and what we try to do, what we've been trying to do with a number of organizations, is to see how actually create a very virtuous feedback loop between the government and non-state actors, the private sector and subnational, so that the effort that subnational actors are doing are taken into account in their national efforts a little bit more. And I think, you know, it's starting. It's been very important, you know, in the US. The number of private sector now committing to science-based targets has reached, you know, 1,000 actually. So it's been really impressive. And the number, I think, if you look at you know, what is happening in the US, you know, with the states and the cities, you know, it's as if, you know, it's one of the second economy in the world that would be still you know, moving forward based on their commitments to reduce emissions. So it's very significant, you know, as a driver, keeping the momentum. And I think it's going to grow because, you know, cities are the closest to their citizens, and they know that they have very often no choice. When you see the mounting impacts, even cities like Miami, we are actually starting to work with governance from different sides of, you know, the political spectrums, because they need to know how to keep their citizens, their population safe. So it's, and whether it's in urban area or in rural area. And both Anatoni and Isabel said how important it is to keep coherence between what we keep in mind on the climate agenda and on other sectoral economic issues like trade, but also food security, national security. And I think a lot of cities will be at the center of those questions that will affect their citizens. And so I think there's a growing movement that we see around the world on this, and we need to leverage that no matter what happens tonight.
Thank you, Yamit. So whoever will be the next president will have to deal with this energy, this subnational energy, which is really interesting. Isabel, you're mentioning the energetic. So you're mentioning Colombia, and you're saying that Colombia is the sixth co-exporter, and you gave this picture of South America and Latin America still. How can I say, still relying on fossil fuel a lot. And so do you, and Yamit was mentioning the stranded assets that the finance market are pointing clearly. The IMF and everybody and the Davos conference, and well, we have all the signs. So do you see any regional movement in this direction, the direction of renewable energy, to change this kind of picture you told us?
Yes, thank you, Daniela. Well, I see two movements all at once. On the one side, we did see in 2019, when the Secretary General of the UN convened the climate summit, that various countries of the region, at the moment 10, committed to a new regional renewable energy target. The commitment is to achieve 70% renewable energy in their electricity generation to 2030. And that's quite an interesting commitment. When you look at the numbers, well, you see that our region currently has a more or less 59% of our energy being generated by renewable sources, and this includes large hydro. It's important to make that distinction. So it's quite high already now. So it's an incremental target with respect to where we are at the moment, and it's positive. This commitment is known as RELAC. These 10 countries are expecting to expand the list of countries committed to at least cover half of Latin America and the Caribbean by 2021. So it's an interesting and ambitious move, but it's definitely not sufficient. We are also seeing at the same time that our region heavily relies on fossil fuels. Our primary energy still is at 75% dependent on fossil fuels. Primary energy, I mean, so all of our energy sources, not just for electricity. Of course, transport is a big part of that. But when you look at those numbers and you look at what the science tells us, we will need to fully decarbonize by mid-century. We need to have emissions by 2030. This means we need to reduce about 8% of our emissions every year, and we still have a 75% of our primary energy relying on fossils. The thing is looking quite complicated, and you see when I was meaning that there are movements on both sides, at the same time as there are these good commitments on renewable energy for our electricity generation. You see that countries like Brazil, like Colombia, like Mexico, like Argentina, and it goes without saying Venezuela, are all investing heavily on finding new fossil fuel resources to increase fossil fuel extraction without exception. They all have state-owned oil or gas or coal companies or private companies extracting that are including investments at a quite significant level that will attempt to increase our existing resources. And you compare that with the current data that shows us that 80% of known fossil fuel reserves in the world will need to stay in the ground. And that is telling you how many stranded assets we will have in our region. It will be enormous if we don't start a transition right now. So what to do? Instead of trying to invest our revenue that in many cases comes from exporting these fossils in exploring to find new reserves, we should be already now investing those revenues in instigating further growth in sustainable sectors, in planning for a transition that is organized, that is orderly, that is just, that provides opportunities to all of those workers in our region that depend on the extraction and exports of coal, of gas, of oil, and to find for them other opportunities in diversifying our economies. And we are far away from starting that as an organized plan, but we can do it. We can still do it. We're still on time. So I guess we are seeing both movements, and we have more work to do. As Anna was saying, there's half the glass full. We do have good renewable energy prospects in terms of our electricity. Half the glass empty. We still have much to do in terms of our primary energy source, but also in terms of our politics of energy, so that we invest where we need to invest, avoiding stranded assets instead of the opposite.
Thanks, Isabel. Thank you. Thank you, Isabel. We have a few minutes left, and I have at least two questions to the three of you. One is something so if you can answer in 2 minutes or 3 minutes, something like that. I have two things in my mind. One is I've interviewed Professor Johan Rockström from the Potsdam Institute of Climate, the Swedish super famous climatologist, 2 days ago. And he told me that if Mr. Biden wins the election, we can see a kind of a G3 group in the world, with the European Union moving to the decarbonization, then China, as Yamid told us, and then maybe the US, because Joe Biden has this proposal very clear. So there will be this G3 in the world, and these three very powerful regions have a great incredible world to change the world. So my question is about leakage, emissions leakage. and labor leakage. So this leakage might come to the developing world. So how do you see that? And the second thing is that in Brazil, I don't know if Anna agrees, but in Brazil we never hear this concept of just transition, which is one of my favorite ones. So if you can say something about that, and it will be probably our last question. So maybe we can start with, if I don't know, Yam.
Yes, I think we're so connected, and it's true that the signal that those three countries are going to get will have you know uh, ripple effects in all economies of the world, including those countries that are the lungs of industry. So the supply chain and the issue of circular economy needs to be taken into account. When we build back better, there was Minister Koizumi from Japan saying we need to redesign also our society, taking into account the decarbonization, decentralization, and also circular economy. And I think that all companies in Brazil, all companies in Latin America needs to also look at the signals that will be coming to those countries to see how they're going to affect their business model and their economy. And similarly, even not just at the business level, at the country level, what's Anna and Isabel talked about trade. What would be the unintended impact if these signals were not taken seriously? What are we going to be left behind? Are we going to be able to restructure to get the right governance so that we react very promptly to actually take the lead and take the benefits of also what the transformation can be? So I think it's a good question, and there's a lot of analysis that can be done, and it's a very important one for organizations like the World Resource Institute, Mission 2020, to help countries to identify what pathway, what it could be. And just transition means different things in different countries. The debate is real. It's about equity. It's about reducing inequality. What you're going to tell, the workers, that in the US, for example, just because of the debate, again, the lessons was green jobs seems to be very elitist, for some workers in Pennsylvania. We need to make sure that actually they can really benefit. It's also can reach to them. They are not left behind. I think we still have some work to do to get that narrative right, and this is what needs to be seen as exciting, not daunting.
Thank you, Yamit. Everybody is watching to what is going on in your country now. So thank you very much. Isabel, if you can say something about these ideas, this question.
Yes. The combination of the EU, the US, and China is probably making up almost the entirety of the trade partners for Latin America, almost the entirety. So the three of them moving towards decarbonization will inevitably impact how we relate to the world as providers of commodities and any other exports. I think we are seeing already some steps into the direction, in particular in the EU, of adopting something called border carbon adjustments. It's still timid, but it is coming. They are considering very seriously taking these forward, which they have many objectives, one of which is to avoid carbon leakage. I think carbon leakage will be unavoidable, and we will need to figure out how to minimize it. These measures through trade are one of the ways in which carbon leakage can be minimized. And linking this to the excellent point you're making on just transition, to me, the entire question is precisely that. If the so-called G3 moves ahead and we don't start the transition now, the further we wait, the more unfair, unjust, unequitable, and costly the transition will be for our own workers. The more measures like border carbon adjustment will be imposed on us. So it is in our own advantage, and not just because they will impose border carbon adjustment, but because it's good for our own development to start the transition early, to harvest on that opportunity rather than the opposite. Now, the one thing I will say is that the G3 is kind of an idyllic scenario in terms of moving the world's economy ahead. But what will probably happen is that the G3 will have both competitive and cooperative dynamics, which can be good for climate. And we need to ride on that competition and cooperation all at once. We will see trade competition, and we need to make that a race to the most decarbonized products, being the best products to trade with. And there will be cooperation, and we need to make that cooperation be the cooperation that provides technology and accelerates it, so that that competition can also be a race. So this needs to be building on what Yamid was mentioning earlier, a race to zero. The race has started. The US will hop on or not, but that won't stop the race. And we need to hop on that race instead of only wait for the G3 to move or not, because the benefits are in our own advantage.
Thank you. Thank you, Isabel. Thank you very much. Anna, well, yes, and also what Isabel and Yamit they were saying, so this border tax is also being discussed in the US for different, either for the Republicans, in this moment, America's first, but also for the Democrats, they are historically close to the unions. So the border tax was something that is on the table, and it was when President Barack Obama was trying to pass the cap and trade legislation and things like that. So Anna, how do you see that? It's really, how do you see this agenda, the climate agenda, so close to the trade agenda?
Yes, I mean, I couldn't agree more with both Yamid and Isabel. Totally, in sync. What I also feel, the U.S. election is a U.S. election made climate. So be very quick. I was just, we don't have more time, but I mean, with the US election, obviously made climate on the top of an election of that part. That's the first of all the other ones that will come. Climate will be on the top of the geopolitics as well. Brazil has a comparative advantage, has always had, because of the size, nature, everything, solar, wind. We have to transform our comparative advantage in our competitive advantage. As Isabel says, it is in our own benefit. It's in our benefit of our people, our workers. We cannot just sit and wait and say what we don't want. Let us concentrate on what we want and negotiate it from there, rather than negotiating on what we don't want. I think that's, for me, I know we are finished, but I think the subnationals, the investors in Brazil, the banks, the private sector, they have started thinking that way. What do we want for ourselves? And from there, discuss with the G3. But we cannot just say, what? No, that's coming.
Okay, thank you very much. For me, it was an absolute wonderful panel. Thank you, Yamid. Thank you, Isabel. Thank you, Anna. Thanks the audience. And please, so for the people who is still here, if you can, there are other panels coming, following, and also the Conferência Brasileira da Mudança do Clima will happen again next week on the 12th. So thank you very much. It was such a pleasure. Thank you.